It's the old man again, up early. And it's snowing out now, so what else you gonna do? Get your toys out and play with them. Last night we were practicing with them, or run them. I run them every day. And we were talking about the dead zone, which Tim called it the dead zone. I called it just the crap area. And communication gets you the answer, and it's because we don't have a bladder in these. So regardless of what you do, bleeding them, which you're going to bleed it upside down because it actually sits this way, which means your piston is up here. The piston in this is at the top. It's floating in air, and it's impossible to get all of the air out of that. In fact, you do when you bleed it. We do this here, which it's easy to take off. 4 screws here. I pulled the 2 on the bottom. You don't have to pull the axle out of the thing. So these will slide out and you can pull these out of here. I've loosened these already. But you see the piston's up. So the compressed piston goes down. And you can feel it. Even with the spring on there. You take the spring off, it's more amplified. But it's what it is when we compress it, or force the oil out and bleed that out, the air out of there, the piston shaft displaces oil, displaces volume inside the chamber. So now, when we pull that back, and you do get a little oil leak out of these, but by the piston shaft coming out of that, it causes a vacuum. Well, it pulls air in right here. So what that means is now the shock is sitting in its normal position. The piston's sitting in air up here. So it actually hits a hard spot. You can feel it. There's a hard spot there. Then it will get fluid. And that is the reason that I will see these, they'll run through bumpy areas. The front wheel doesn't move at all. It just bounces off everything, and it's because of this dead zone. So we're going to see what we can do about the dead zone. Things that I had done initially was just restrict the movement here by putting a limiter under here. And what I use for a limiter, I actually use something soft. I'm thinking I don't want to put stress on that. But the only stress on this when it's up is the spring itself here. Which there's no spacers in these at all. And I did talk about preloading another one where they were wanting to preload it more. I preload by limiting that. So now we've just preloaded the spring a little bit. And you really have to put enough of a limiter in here or the piston will still live in the oil. Or the air, I mean, not in the oil. And you wouldn't notice if it was this way, but I think you just can't do it. It would bend. So here the piston lives in oil. The air's up here. And it's going to have air. It has to. And it's the compression of the air. And well, I'll show you the piston here. We'll take this apart. It's actually pretty easy. Pretty simple. Get the spring off it, and we'll just see. These have been in here probably a dozen batteries anyway, and they're dry, which means they seal. And I have noticed on, I think maybe 2-3 times that I've taken and updated the oil, where there would be some moisture here, a little bit of dirt collecting. Well, both of these, I looked at them, they're dry, so they do seal really well. They're both dry. I didn't clean that off, so there's nothing. So I'm pulling the spring off this so we can see if we've got pressure. So there's a little bit of pressure from the air. This one does not have a limiter. And I did this with one of my other ones, which did have limiters. So what I've done to put a limiter in there is I found, and I'll tell you my logic with that. Here, let's pull this the rest of the way apart. So I pulled the cap, dumped most of the oil out, which does take a little while, and there's like a diffuser in here too. There. So you got to get that diffuser out of there. That's what I'm calling it. We could look it up, see what they call it. But, that has to do I don't really know what they're doing with that. It's got to be, it's real loose on the shaft, so it's not really sealing any oil. Maybe they did this to try to give it an air pocket. To, you know, I don't know. I don't know what the thinking is on that, because this would sit this way in the piston, vertically this way, and that air pocket comes down. I mean, it comes down far enough that you really got to limit. What I did, using a piece of aluminum tube. I just happen to have this stuff because I'm an aircraft guy. And I had a copper one here too. It was a little bit bigger. But the idea is to displace less volume inside the cylinder here, the chamber. Because the more oil that we displace, the more air we're going to pull in when you bleed this out. Which means the more air, the lower that air pocket goes. And this is where the piston lives. The piston lives up here. Yeah, and I was going to show you the slam on that before I emptied it, and I forgot. At the top, which you can really feel without the spring. So you put this thing back together and take the spring off it and just tap on that, and you'll feel it hit the oil. It smack, and it actually stops the shaft from being able to move in there, which is important. So what I did was I cut, and I'll get my tool out and just show you how I just held it with my fingers. You don't want to change the shape of this. We want it to fit on here nice, so that it just travels. We don't want to stir up the oil. If it fit even tighter would be better, I think, but I don't know how you could get thinner than that. But this is going to displace less oil than this, because this is thicker. It's soft, and my idea again was I didn't want to damage anything in here. It has kind of a cushion, but what we're going to find is that the air at the top acts as a cushion. So and there's no stress on this because this moves away from this bushing that we're putting in here. So let me get my tool ready and cut this off. And boy, 20 minutes, snowed probably a half inch already. Got a blizzard out there. So anyway, about 10 millimeters, 400 thousandths, where I'm gonna cut this at. Very, very slowly. It gets hot. Okay, put these together probably 15 times, trying different things, bleeding it this way, that way. So this is the way I've decided, because this is made, I think, to float. So I don't want to trap it at the piston with this. I want it to be able to do whatever it would do if it helps stabilize this in there. I don't really know what they're doing with that, but if that piston moves quickly and there's air, that's going to stay at the top regardless. So I'm just going to let it stay at the top. That's my logic on that. And the idea is less here, less oil displacement. I got my piston closer to the oil. It's all about smoothing this out on the initial movement of the fork. Okay, so that's the way I put that together. We got 10 millimeters of spacer in there. Done this, I don't know, a dozen times now, filling them. And I'm not even worried about getting all the air out. It doesn't matter. We want a little bit of air in there. And I'll explain what that actually does. You end up with a vacuum, and they do seal real well. So I don't really have any intention of, like, we want the oil as close to the piston as possible. But you just end up leaching a lot of oil out of this thing. You just do what you normally do. Watch the O-rings. One of my O-rings ripped. I'm gonna have to get something to replace that. I have to get one. It's sealed right now without the O-ring in it. So we just push it up just like we normally do. That's what they tell you to do, to bleed them out. This is it. I move that back and forth to not tear another seal up. And there is going to be, there's a little pressure as we put that down. We're building pressure inside the chamber here. But you're going to see what's going to happen when we flip it over, which is the way it's going to be in the machine. And I'm just trying to make sure that O-ring's down in that. It's not just tearing it up, which it did a tiny bit right there. Okay, let's snug this up. Don't need to kill them. I have never had one of these come loose. I think these wrenches are ultra cheap though. Seems like as I use them, they don't want to go on here right. Oops, the wrong one. I want to loosen that one. Tighten this one, because we're done with that. Yeah, I've used this a couple times and it doesn't want to. You have to grind the end of the wrench. That's what you get. Okay, so this is the way that it goes in the machine. And what we're seeing, see that vacuum? See that pull that down with the spring? Notice it? And the reason I invert this to do that is we do want to pull some air. That's a bit much. So it has a vacuum on it and it actually wants to move. But I can feel that air in that. So we want to get rid of a little bit of that air if we can. And we don't want to build a bunch of pressure inside it. So you actually have to pull the packing loose on this. You actually gotta, and I found that you have to, there you go, push that in, got rid of some of that pressure, pulled the packing out. So I've got that all the way down. I'm going to put the packing back in it. You see how that's forcing the shaft the other way? I forced it up a little. So we're trying to meet in the middle on the volumetric change inside of this. So that won't draw air now. I mean, that's enough. It's just finger tight, and you just don't have to kill them when you tighten them up. So now when I pull this, I've got a little bit of pullback. It's not as much. It's not as drastic as what it was. And the spring will not notice that. But what that's doing is it's setting this up to move for you. And then there's a tiny bit of pressure at the bottom. So we have, I don't really know how to mark the travel on this. We took 10 millimeters out of it, but we've got that much travel. My finger slid on it. Very slippery. There's just a little bit at the bottom, a little bit of pullback. So they seal up really well. Like I said, the spring, I'm going to tighten this up. Spring doesn't really see that little bit of vacuum on that, because there is some air in this shock. You're never going to get rid of it all. In fact, it has to draw some back, and if it doesn't, so I can tell that's already, I didn't do that with the other one, but you can feel it. And that's very smooth. So we put our spring back on it. Oops. And again, I've put 10 millimeters, so I must have 10 millimeters of preload in it. I was guessing 8, but I measured it and it was 10. And you got to grab that with the wrench to, you just can't hold that slippery shaft. And I got a couple other things that we were talking about that. So that's moving where I want it real easy, right at the very top. And I don't feel anything in that. And it just seems like 10 was the magic. I tried several different amounts of limiting on the return. Like I said, there's no stress on this here. I tried this stuff in the rear, and there's so much stress back there, it'll destroy something like this. So but there's nothing on the front. And so there's a two-part plus side to this. By limiting this, and as soon as I get some travel, I'll put it on the bike and show you that too. I'll do the other one. By shortening the front, so there's actually three bonus. I took these out so the preload's not as aggressive as you'd think, because if I didn't take the spacers out, now we got a lot of spring tension on here. But it gets the bike down in the fork in the front end low enough, you're in what I'm going to call the stable zone on the front end. Because when these are fully extended, you watch them and you see it. I got plenty of videos out there where you can see what's going on. It's just head shake and you know, no give in the front end, and the whole bike will start shaking. It's a lot more than if you have a nice soft cushion here that when it needs to move, it can move. So you're out of the dead zone on the shock. We took the piston out of the air pocket. The front end is more stable because we have a shorter front end. And people have asked me, how do you turn that, how you get around that corner? What are you doing? What's your driving method? What is it? The turning radius is better with the shorter front end. So if you got nothing but long sweepers, and again, the stable zone on your front end, less shake, will handle sweepers better even, or landing on a slight incline when you land, a slight angle like that, because a rigid front end doesn't like that. And this is how we're taking that impact out of that. So it flows, it doesn't just go crack, and you can feel it. The piston leaves and crashes because it's in air, and it crashes into the oil, and it's a hard stop. So pretty simple, that's it. I'm going to do this, and then I'll show you what it looks like on the bike. Yeah, this is the other one that I hadn't done. I was going to show you the dead zone on it. Right there. Smack. Smack. I can feel it hitting that oil. And it actually makes them, so your movement's only that much. You would think otherwise, but unless you're just crashing it right on the front end, and you know, we're talking about on the track and keeping the bike stable when it's down on the track. So I got them both together. They both feel the same. That's the way it goes. Nothing. Nice and smooth. I feel nothing at the top. But you can really feel it without the spring on it. Both feel the same. They feel smooth. Another thing with them is make sure you're clean up in here so that this doesn't add any kind of drag to the movement to that. This is a used bike, and it had one of these was bent. I had upgraded a set to some fancy looking ones. Stock ones I think are probably better actually. But you don't want any drag. See, that one's got some drag. I can feel it. There's something happening in here. Right there. Because that has to move. See, there's a problem there. And these are clean. I just cleaned them out. So I'll have to look at that and see why we're getting that drag in there. And it's not that. Well, it might be. So again, this is used. I don't know if there's something. I'll look at that before I put that one on. But just tighten this guy up, put it back on. Of course, you don't want to put the wheel on until you get these guys back on here, but we're ready to mount this one. This one here, I'll get that drag right there. I can feel it. So maybe a little sandpaper, get maybe a burr or something. Okay, I pulled everything apart and checked everything. It's not that. The seal, not that. It's not the lower guide. It was actually the tube itself up, so it's probably bent. I got a little dent, bend, something right in there, but I did get it so it was free enough that I'm okay. And then you rotate it, rotate these to a nice spot, not just so that you can see this. Cool. I want it to flow. I want that thing to float. So we got to put this back in here. Tighten this up on here. Put the end cap on, put the seal back on it. Dirt, dust seal, which they do work. Yep, nice and smooth. Okay, let's get them back on the bike. So I got them on, and you'll see here, even if I push down, see how it's moving? Typically you don't get it, if you just push down, you're not getting movement there. You have to have something here for it to hit. You see that compress? See the action I got out of that? It's just my finger. And then the sitting position, as soon as there's any lift, see that? I mean, it just floats so easy. We're down here in the strongest part of the suspension, not fully compressed, but because really that's where it would be most stable. But that's not going to eat up a bump. It's going to be like locked out like it is out here with air and just bouncing. And you see how much I've limited that. When that's fully extended, typically this dirt guard is going to be down. It's going to be down near the seal of this. So there's that 10 millimeters and the preload 10 millimeters. And man, it makes a difference. Smooth. Even just pushing down on it, I've got movement. And you check one out. Take a stock one. They will not compress like that. You have to have this forward momentum. And you see just rolling over my fingers, the thing compresses. So, if you're out Losi Promotoing like me all the time, you're just tapping the throttle all the time. In fact, less steering, more throttle.